Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hi, Kevin Hirten here. Malika Bilal is on parental leave, and I will be filling in for a while. So here's the show. Today, as Trump takes power hours from now, immigrant families in the U.S. brace for potentially seismic shocks.
We're going to end up with the largest deportation in American history. We have no choice.
What will happen to the millions of undocumented immigrants and their families in the United States? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take.
Hi, Kevin. My name is Maribel Hernandez Rivera. I am coming to you from the Bronx, New York, and I'm the Director of Government and Policy Affairs for the ACLU for Border and Immigration.
Well, thank you, Maribel. It's a very relevant job title on this day, the day of the inauguration. So welcome to The Take. As someone who spends their time fighting for immigrant rights, this must feel like D-Day. I mean, the day you've spent your whole career preparing for. There's a lot to talk about, but maybe you can start by just reminding us what incoming President Donald Trump has actually promised to do.
Yes, unfortunately, President Donald Trump has promised the biggest mass deportation operation in the history of the United States.
Donald Trump has promised a mass roundup of millions of undocumented persons who would be taken to detention camps like Japanese American civilians were during World War II, and then rapidly deported.
What this means, it means creating huge amounts of detention camps. He also has promised to take away citizenship from children who are born to undocumented parents. He has also promised to use the military and deploy them in order to pursue his mass deportation agenda. So what we are seeing is we're seeing an all attack on immigrants. We saw it during the first Trump administration when we saw families being separated, when we saw children in cages. So we know that when he says he's going to do it, we have to take him at his word.
How many people are at risk right now?
Millions of people are at risk. Our parents, our family members, our neighbors, our children. We talk about even children having to be worried about whether or not they're going to be able to see their parents, whether or not they will be able to grow up with their parents. I can tell you, I once upon a time had to separate from my dad, and I know how horrible it is to be for years longing to be with your parent and not really knowing them because you are away from them for so many years.
So what does this look like, right? Your organization, the ACLU, has done a deep dive into Trump's policies, which examines, what he can and cannot enforce as soon as Monday or Tuesday. What is enforceable here? Can he just snap his fingers and call for the arrest and deportation of millions of people on day one?
So we have to see what he's going to do, but what we expect will happen. When you talk about mass deportations, what does that mean? That means conducting raids at workplaces. That means conducting raids at schools, because they have even said that they're no longer going to take care of those protected areas where people go because they need to report something to the police, or when they go to a hospital because they have a medical issue, or when the kids go to the schools, or when they go to churches. Traditionally, those are areas that have been protected from immigration enforcement because we don't want to terrorize communities. But this incoming administration has said that they don't care. They're going to go anywhere and everywhere looking for people. It's very important to note that in order for the president to be able to accomplish what he has promised to do, he will need collaboration by states and localities. And therefore, states and localities could also create a firewall that protects their immigrant communities. So we could have states and localities say, you're not going to use my resources. We're not going to allow you to come into our jurisdiction to terrorize immigrants. And so it's both ways. We have seen it with Texas, where they have themselves undertaken the mantle of, we're going to do whatever we can, and they're violating the law. And at the same time, we can see it on the other hand, where we can see state and localities saying, no, not under my watch. We will protect immigrant communities in our jurisdictions. You have to remember, if we're talking about millions of people who they're trying to go after, they don't really care what your family status is, what your community ties are. They're just going after everyone. So we're worried about racial profiling because, for example, I myself, I'm a U.S. citizen. My spouse has temporary protected status. How do you know the difference between the two of us? And we also worry about a violation of due process, where people have a right to be able to present their case. We are worried that this administration has said that they want to get rid of people as soon as possible. And so we worry that their due process rights will be violated.
Are there differences between what Trump would be able to do by executive order and what he would require new laws to be passed to do?
Yes, definitely. One thing that is really important to note, and again, we saw it under the first Trump administration, President Trump and his advisors, they don't seem to really be limited by the law. So for example, during the first Trump administration, the ACLU, we sued the Trump administration 400 times because of all the violations that were happening. And we won in many cases. We have seen his administration, the advisors right now for immigration are the architect of family separation, the architect of putting kids in cages. So we have seen them not care about it. They're like, okay, we'll figure out, let the law figure out. But what happens is, while the legal process happens, you have people who are actually harmed. You have human lives who are just hurt and separated while this happens. We saw, for example, with children. The ACLU sued the Trump administration during their family separation policy. And what happened in the meantime, there were so many children who were lost. Till this day, we haven't been able to find all the children that were separated from their parents.
Okay. So, Maribel, today is the day when all that rhetoric starts to meet reality. You work with immigrants every day. Many of them are undocumented. Can you think of a family out of millions, a family that you know, a family that's fearful today? Maybe put a face on this issue for us, why they came to the United States and how they are preparing for this Trump presidency.
I'm going to give you the example of my family. That's the closest example that I have. I came to the United States when I was 13. My husband came to the United States when he was 18, more than 20 years ago. And I am now a U.S. citizen. He has temporary protected status. He has a U.S. citizen child. And at this moment, we are well aware that President Trump has said that he will end temporary protected status. We're well aware that people like my husband are vulnerable to deportation. During the first Trump administration, President Trump attempted to end temporary protected status, and the only reason that didn't go through was because of the courts, because there was a lawsuit. So we know that this is a reality. We know that we have to plan. We're in a mode of, crisis planning. What are you going to do if one person gets deported and the other one? So in my case, do I go to Honduras to be with him when I know that his family members in Honduras have been killed? Or do I stay behind helping my mother who lives with us and who depends on me? So right now, where we are as an immigrant community, my family, as well as many other families, are trying to figure out what are our options. Let's start planning and how can we protect each other as a community? Because the one thing that is important to note is that as a community, we are greater in numbers and we can protect ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, going back to Honduras is actually possible. There are many people in this situation who cannot go back to their country of origin because they're refugees, they're fleeing political persecution. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yes. So this past year, I was able to go down to the border, to the U.S.-Mexico border, where you have a lot of people who are waiting to come into the United States to be able to apply for asylum. People seeking asylum and people who do obtain asylum is because, as you were saying, Kevin, they are running for their lives. Their lives are in danger. So I recall meeting a woman and her daughter. It was a young child who was about 7 years old. She knew that back home she wasn't safe, but she had been stopped at the border because there was a policy back then that didn't allow people to come into the country to seek asylum. And that is the same policy that President Trump is saying he's going to reinstate. That is something called Title 42, which does not allow people to come into the United States. It forces them to stay in Mexico or elsewhere while they wait for their case to be pending. But what happens there is that people are waiting in really dangerous circumstances. And that's not the way the process ought to be, because the law allows for people to apply for asylum and to follow that process.
But the administration that deported the most undocumented immigrants wasn't Donald Trump's. That's after the break. So, Maribel, we've established the goal of the Trump administration, which is mass deportation. We've talked about the stakes, who this will harm, millions of people, including your own family. Now let's talk about how you fight back. Give us a lay of the land here. This will happen on many fronts, I know. The ACLU will play a role. What are some of the ways you can help protect these families from the policies that are coming?
Well, we have various tools in our toolkit. One, as I mentioned before, is going to the courts. Suing the government when they are violating people's constitutional rights. That's one. Two, we have 4 million members who are ready to take the streets, ready to protect our immigrant communities. We recently, for example, had a training for our members to be able to be ready for this moment, and it was a Know Your Rights training.
Yeah, this Know Your Rights training is very interesting to me. So maybe we can do a little bit of that right now for somebody who might be watching this or listening to this and wants to impart that to their family members. Can you give us a little shorthand of what type of rights you have and what you want people to know if someone comes to their door?
Definitely. Number one is that anybody in the United States is protected by the Constitution. Whether you are a U.S. citizen or an immigrant, you are protected by the Constitution. What are some of those constitutional rights? For example, you have the right to due process. So what that means is that if there's a legal process that needs to be followed, they should follow it. Now, one of the worries that we have is that the Trump administration has said, we want to get rid of people as quickly as possible. So we worry that they will not follow the process and not give people the due process that they deserve. Also, people should know that they have the right to remain silent. And so if a police officer, for example, asks for your citizenship documents, you don't have to reply to them. You can say, I have the right to remain silent. I want to speak to my lawyer. And then also, if somebody comes to your door and they say, police, ICE, they have to show you a warrant. They can't just come to your home just because they feel like it. So the most important thing that I would say right now for immigrant communities is know your rights, have a plan, and make sure that you know the organizations in your community who can help you if anything goes wrong.
Maribel, we talk about big crackdowns to come, but more undocumented migrants were deported under Biden than under the first Trump administration, which I think would definitely surprise people. And we also know that from documents that the ACLU has uncovered that the Biden administration had planned to expand the detention of migrants. So generally, how much of these enforcement actions are new and how much of this is just a continuation? And
so that's why the ACLU, we have been fighting for immigrant rights under various administration, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's anybody else. So yes, we have seen, for example, in the previous administration, as you mentioned, the request for proposals to expand detention. What does that do? Well, that creates the infrastructure that the Trump administration can use in order to detain people, in order to deport people. And so that is why for us, the ACLU is nonpartisan. So we don't really care about what political party you're in, what political affiliation you have. What we care about is, are you protecting civil rights and civil liberties? That is our mandate. Our mandate is to make sure that the Constitution of the United States is being followed. And so we sued the Biden administration, we sued the Trump administration, and we will continue to do so because our mandate is to protect immigrant rights.
Yeah. Does it surprise you how bipartisan some of this has become? I think the ACLU is expecting that some Democrats will support this Laken-Riley Act.
Yes. So the Laken-Riley Act is currently being debated in Congress. The Senate is with the Senate right now. And let me just explain what the Laken-Riley Act is. What it is a proposed law that would mandate the detention of people whether or not they have been convicted of a crime. So if you have been accused, if you have been charged of a crime that is related to theft, you would be mandated to be detained. That goes against our principles. We know that this does not create public safety. And so we're not going to allow it. We are and have been disappointed to see that the support for this law has increased. I don't think that people are understanding. This law has no limitations. A child could be accused of shoplifting. A child accused of shoplifting could be then mandatorily detained. That is not within our system of values. That is not what we espouse, but that is what this Laken-Riley Act would do.
Right. So this would be under the full force of the law, which would really constrain your ability to fight this in the court, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So this is the day where the rhetoric finally does meet the reality. We said it before, we'll say it again. What happens if the United States just deports millions of people next week? Do you think people are really prepared for what's to come about the loss, both culturally and economically?
I don't think that people really understand, because one thing is when you hear the rhetoric, right? And we saw it under the French Trump administration, where when he first ran for president, people didn't believe that what he was saying was going to happen. And then we saw it in action and we're like, oh, well, and it was worse than we thought. And so I worry that that's the same thing that's happening right now. When people hear mass deportations, it's just a word. They don't understand what it means. But when they start seeing their children's friends no longer in school, when they start seeing that the person who takes care of their mother, or when they start seeing that our DACA holders who are teachers, who are professors, who are lawyers, are no longer here with us because they've been deported, and when they start feeling the economic consequences of these mass deportations, I don't believe that the American people are going to put up with this. Now, it's really important to note in terms of the economic benefits of immigration, it is undisputed that immigrants provide an immigration benefit to the United States. There have been many reports by the government and by many other sectors that show that it is thanks to immigrants, both immigrants who have been here for a long time, as well as newly arrived immigrants, that our economic system hasn't collapsed, that we have not gone into recession because immigrants are filling jobs, because immigrants are adding to the economy. So we know for a fact that if these mass deportations were to happen and were to become a reality, that will not only hurt our society, our communities, our families, but our economy is going to be definitely very hurt.
Yeah, I mean, look, we talk about this feels like deja vu for you because we could have had this conversation in 2016, but it is different. I wonder how this feels more of a crisis than 2016, or if you even agree with that characterization.
The reason why it feels, it definitely, like I mentioned, Trump 1 was very harmful for our immigrant communities. I was working in the field back then, and I remember clearly, again, I remember the fear for my family. This moment, what we're seeing, though, at this moment, is we are seeing a Trump administration that is much more experienced. We are seeing advisors who have been preparing for the past 4 years and whose sole focus has been, how do we get rid of immigrants? And so we know that they're much more prepared. So are we. We've been preparing. But we know that the fight is going to be harder. We also know that, for example, during the first Trump administration, there were many judges that were appointed by the first Trump administration. So there's a very clear change in circumstances right now. We know that the fight is going to be difficult. We're clear-eyed. This is not going to be easy. This is going to hurt many people, but we cannot give up. We're going to continue to fight.
Well, Maribel, thank you so much for coming on The Take.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
And that's The Take. As a new administration takes power in Washington, D.C., what questions do you have? Let us know in the comments. We're always looking through to see what you think. What kind of episodes would you like to hear about the United States under President Trump? And don't forget to give this episode a like so more people can find it. We'll be back tomorrow.